The United Nations is reminding governments that the climate crisis remains a major threat to billions of people. That's after a new report by the UN Environment Programme and the University of Oxford found that global heating has become an afterthought as countries spend trillions of dollars to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. Paolo Montecillo reports.
Governments have spent a record amount of money in the past year fighting the coronavirus pandemic.
We will continue doing whatever it takes to support the British people and businesses through this moment of crisis.
We have taken on extra credit, and everyone knows that this will continue to be necessary for 2021 to be able to stabilize the economy.
In the process, policymakers seem to have mostly forgotten the other existential threat to daily life, the climate crisis. In a new report, the UN's Environment Programme says stimulus spending reached more than $14 trillion for the world's 50 leading economies last year. Only $368 billion of that went to what can be considered climate-friendly projects. Those include renewable energy facilities, electric vehicles, and upgrading infrastructure so they use less power. The environment is already paying the price for the trade-off. Research shows global emissions fell a record 7% last year. But the International Energy Agency says they've been rising again since December. And there are signs governments are getting the message. In the US, President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus proposal includes money for mass transport and tax breaks for renewable energy investments. His administration also wants to spend $2 trillion over 4 years to reduce the nation's reliance on fossil fuels.
We need to phase out coal 5 times faster than we have been. We need to increase tree cover 5 times faster. We need to ramp up renewable energy 6 times faster. We need to transition to electric vehicles at a rate 22 times faster. You get the drift?
The UN says rich countries should also extend aid to emerging economies. This could come in the form of grants and, in some cases, the cancellation of debt. That would free up resources for less wealthy nations to build back cleaner. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Well, for more, let's go to Brian O'Callaghan in Sydney. He's head of the Economic Recovery Project at Oxford University, which led the UN's latest analysis. Welcome to the program, Brian. I know it's really early there, so we appreciate you joining us right now. But as we heard from Paolo's report, you've found that only a small fraction of the nearly $15 trillion that's being spent by governments to combat the economic effects of the pandemic are being spent on green projects. Can you tell us which countries are actually keeping the environment in mind when it comes to the recovery funding?
Wonderful. It's great to be with you this evening, Oscar. Thank you for having me. Yes, you're absolutely right. Today, in partnership with the United Nations Environment Programme and also the IMF, the UNDP, GIZ and PAGE, we are introducing the Global Recovery Observatory, which is a program to go on over the course of the next year and perhaps even beyond. In the immediate term, we've reviewed 2020 spending, and we found that overall, only about 2.5% of total spending has been green. But the more important number is recovery spending. We find that about 18% of recovery spending, which is really what we should be looking at, spending oriented to reinvigorating the economy, 18% is green. In terms of the leaders, you have outstanding new and ambitious programs from mostly high-income European nations, for example, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Germany, and France, as well as some emerging players, including South Korea and Spain.
Okay, so if the majority of developed economies aren't spending their recovery funds on green-related projects, how are they using that money?
I mean, it's being spent all over. You have some going towards new road projects, for example, some being used for new school building or hospital construction. Of course, each of those initiatives are vital and have their role to play. In many instances, though, there are opportunities to, instead of spending on some of the more traditional dirty industries, for example, spending on a new coal power plant or a new gas-fired station in Australia, spending on green alternatives like renewable energy.
Now, as you mentioned, it's interesting that it is the wealthier Scandinavian countries in this sense that are leading the way in terms of spending their recovery funds on green projects. And that's the case, isn't it? Because green projects are often seen as the purview of wealthy countries, luxury items that a few economies can afford. But how can green or environmental projects really help to revive economies that have been ravaged by the pandemic, both rich and poor countries?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up this economic conversation because I'm first and foremostly here acting as an economist as opposed to an environmentalist. And we've reached the point of development of many of these technologies where the conversation isn't actually about climate change anymore. In many cases, the economic rationale stands on its own. And so the idea that you can't bring economic gains through investing in green technologies, that's completely false at this point. If you think about our future industries, what society will rely on, many of those are green, right? We will be moving towards clean energy. We will be moving towards clean transport. So for governments to orient their societies now to become future leaders in that space is vitally important.
Okay, Brian O'Callaghan, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for sharing with us your analysis on the program.